What really happens when the quiet rules of the British royal family collide with personalities that refuse to be ignored? For years, Princess has built a reputation unlike almost anyone else inside the House of Windsor. She is direct, disciplined, famously hardworking, and rarely interested in creating a performance for the cameras. Her public image has often been defined by duty rather than glamour, and that reputation has made her one of the most recognizable figures in the modern monarchy. But when Catherine, Princess of Wales, enters the story, the situation becomes far more complicated. Not necessarily because there's an established feud, but because the two women represent very different generations and styles of royal service. That contrast is exactly why stories about tension between them attract so much attention. Catherine has become one of the most closely watched members of the monarchy, while and has spent decades proving herself through relentless public work. One represents the future of the institution, while the other represents a generation that learned to survive by putting duty before personal emotion. Add Queen Camilla's family to that picture, and suddenly even an ordinary royal gathering can become the subject of intense speculation. The story circulating online suggests that Camilla's daughter, Laura Lopez, somehow found herself at the center of a confrontation involving Catherine and Princess Anne. But there is an important distinction that should not be ignored. A dramatic headline is not automatically evidence of a real argument. Laura Lopez is Camilla's daughter, and therefore part of the wider family circle surrounding the monarch, but she is not a working royal carrying out constitutional duties in the same way as Princess Anne or Catherine. That difference matters because it changes the way any interaction should be interpreted. So, why does this story feel believable to so many royal watchers? The answer may have less to do with one confirmed confrontation, and more to do with the personalities involved. Princess Anne has spent most of her adult life operating according to a very simple philosophy: show up, do the work, and avoid unnecessary drama. She has carried out an extraordinary number of royal engagements and has repeatedly been recognized for her work ethic. Her approach is practical, sometimes blunt, and very different from the carefully managed public image associated with younger generations of royals. Catherine, meanwhile, has had to master an entirely different kind of royal pressure. From the moment she married Prince William, every gesture, expression, outfit, and interaction was examined by millions of people. Over time, she developed a reputation for calm public diplomacy. Her role is not simply to attend ceremonies. She is expected to represent the future monarchy while maintaining a sense of warmth and accessibility. That means even a small disagreement, real or imagined, can become dramatically amplified once it enters the royal news cycle. And then there is Laura Lopez. Unlike her mother, Laura did not become a full-time working member of the monarchy. She has largely maintained a private life away from the center of royal duties. That makes sensational stories portraying her as someone openly challenging Princess and or Catherine particularly difficult to establish as fact without direct evidence. There may be moments of disagreement inside any family, including a royal family, but the public should be careful about turning speculation into certainty. Still, the idea of a clash is powerful because it touches a much larger question: who gets to define the future identity of the royal family? Princess Anne belongs to a generation shaped by Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Her style is rooted in discipline, service, and personal responsibility. She has often appeared comfortable ignoring the expectations of celebrity culture. She does not need to dominate headlines to demonstrate relevance. Her longevity and record of public service speak for themselves. Catherine's position is completely different. She is one of the central figures of the next generation. As the wife of the future king, her public image is inseparable from the future of the monarchy itself. Her approach has generally been more modern and media conscious, although she has also demonstrated a strong respect for royal tradition. This creates an interesting contrast with, and not necessarily a conflict, but a difference in how two generations understand the same institution. And that difference can become fascinating when other members of the family enter the room. Queen Camilla's relationship with her children is another important piece of the story. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez have occupied an unusual position as the monarch's stepchildren. They are connected to the royal family through Camilla, but they do not carry the same formal constitutional responsibilities as senior working royals. That unusual position can make public appearances involving them especially interesting to royal observers. The internet, however, often removes those distinctions. A glance can become a disagreement. A serious expression can become anger. A short conversation can become a confrontation. And before anyone's verified what happened, a dramatic story can spread across social media as if it were an established fact. This is where the story surrounding Princess and Catherine becomes particularly interesting. There is evidence of friendly and relaxed public interactions between the two women. In 2026, for example, their interaction at the Commonwealth Day service attracted attention for a light-hearted moment involving their elaborate hats, and blew a kiss toward Catherine, and Catherine responded warmly, creating a very different picture from the idea of two women locked in a permanent feud. That does not prove that they always agree. No family works that way, and royal life certainly does not eliminate differences of opinion, but it does show why sensational claims need context. Princess Anne's reputation for being outspoken is well established. She has long been portrayed as one of the more direct members of the family, and her public career has included moments when her blunt personality became part of her legend. She has also been described as a royal who values service over appearances. Catherine's public style is more restrained. Her role requires her to think carefully about symbolism, diplomacy, and public perception. That difference could easily create an interesting contrast, even when no argument has taken place. Imagine the scene from the perspective of a royal watcher. A formal gathering is taking place. Cameras are present. Family members are moving between conversations. Someone says something that sounds slightly critical. Another person responds with serious expression. Suddenly, the internet has everything it needs to construct an entire story. But what if the real story is not an explosive feud at all? What if the more revealing story is the changing balance of power inside the royal family? For decades, Princess has been one of the monarchy's dependable figures. She belongs to a generation that experienced the reign of Queen Elizabeth II from the inside and understood that public service was not optional. Catherine belongs to a younger generation facing a very different environment, where every royal appearance is instantly analyzed across television, newspapers, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and online forums. The pressures are different, but the expectations are equally intense, and has been able to build credibility over decades. Catherine has had to build hers under a microscope. That distinction matters because public disagreements involving them would carry symbolic meaning far beyond the individuals themselves. If Anne criticizes Catherine, people may interpret it as an old guard challenge to the future. If Catherine pushes back, others may see it as the next generation refusing to be controlled by tradition. And if Camilla's family becomes involved, the story suddenly acquires another layer involving two different branches of the modern royal household. But again, there is no verified evidence establishing the sensational confrontation described in the headline as a documented royal incident. That is precisely why this story should be treated as a discussion about royal dynamics rather than a confirmed blow-up. And perhaps that makes the subject even more interesting, because the British monarchy has always been built on an unusual balance between public duty and private relationships. The people involved are family members, but they are also symbols. A disagreement between ordinary relatives can remain inside a living room. A disagreement between royals can become tomorrow's front page. Princess Anne understands that reality better than most. She grew up in an era when royal family members were expected to maintain a far greater distance from the public. Catherine entered royal life at a time when audiences expect emotional connection, authenticity, and constant visibility. Those two approaches are not necessarily enemies. In fact, they can complement each other, and experience offers stability. Catherine represents continuity into the future, and the monarchy needs both. That is why a supposed confrontation between them is so irresistible to online audiences. It transforms a complicated institutional question into a simple dramatic narrative. Old versus new, tradition versus modernization, directness versus diplomacy. But real royal relationships are rarely that simple. The more credible picture is one of family navigating enormous expectations while trying to maintain personal relationships behind closed doors. Public appearances can offer clues, but they cannot reveal every private conversation. Facial expressions cannot prove arguments. Headlines cannot replace evidence. So before accepting the claim that Princess interrupted or that Camilla's daughter slammed Catherine, it is worth asking a more important question. Where's evidence? That question does not make the story less interesting. It makes it more responsible, because the most fascinating royal stories are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes the real drama lies in the contrast between what the public sees and what the institution requires its members to hide. And if the British royal family is entering another period transition, those contrasts are likely to become even more visible. Princess remains one of the monarchy's strongest links to its previous generation. Catherine is increasingly associated with the institution's future. Camilla occupies a unique position of queen consort and mother to two adults who live largely outside formal royal duty. 3 different positions, 3 different perspectives, one complicated family. And that is why even an ordinary moment between them can become the beginning of a much bigger conversation about loyalty, tradition, influence, and the future of the crown. The question is not simply whether Princess and Catherine have ever disagreed. Of course they may have. The more important question is whether their differences represent a genuine division inside the monarchy, or simply the natural tension created when different generations try to protect the same institution in very different ways. That is where the story becomes much more intriguing, because behind the glamorous photographs, the ceremonies, and the carefully controlled public appearances, the royal family remains what it's always been, a family trying to balance personal relationships with public responsibility. And sometimes that balance is far more dramatic than any headline could suggest. The deeper this royal story goes, the more obvious one thing becomes. The real question may not be whether Princess and Catherine have ever disagreed, but whether their very different approaches to royal life reveal something much bigger about the future of the monarchy. The British royal family has never been a perfectly united institution. Behind the formal ceremonies, carefully chosen words, and polished photographs are people from different generations, with different experiences, priorities, and ideas about what it means to serve the crown. Princess represents one of the strongest links to that older tradition. Catherine represents a generation that has inherited the institution while being expected to help reshape it for a completely different world. That difference becomes especially important when public attention turns toward the people surrounding Queen Camilla. Laura Lopez occupies a unique position in the family. She is connected to the monarch through her mother, but she is not a working royal. She does not stand in the same constitutional position as Princess, and nor does she have the future role of Catherine. Yet, because of her family connection, her name can easily become part of stories about the internal dynamics of the Windsor family. The problem begins when that connection is transformed into claims of private confrontations without reliable evidence. Royal audiences are naturally fascinated by what happens behind closed doors. They want to know who gets along, who disagrees, who feels ignored, and who has influence over the monarch. That curiosity has existed for generations. But social media has dramatically changed the speed at which those stories travel. A photograph that once appeared in a newspaper the next morning can now become a viral discussion within minutes. A few seconds of footage can be analyzed frame by frame, with strangers attempting to determine emotions from a glance, a hand gesture, or a change in facial expression. That environment creates a dangerous gap between observation and interpretation. Someone may look serious because they are concentrating. Someone may appear distant because they are listening to another conversation. A person may walk away from another royal simply because an event requires them to move to another position. Yet once a dramatic theory has been attached to the image, every detail can suddenly appear supported. Princess has experienced this kind of attention for decades. Her personality is one of the most recognizable within the royal family. She has never been famous for excessive emotional display. Her public persona is disciplined and direct, and that can make even an ordinary serious expression look more dramatic than it actually is. Her reputation has also been shaped by her willingness to speak frankly, which makes audiences more likely to believe stories suggesting that she confronted someone behind the scenes. But there's an important difference between a person having a strong personality and a specific confrontation actually taking place. That distinction is often lost in online discussions. Catherine faces the opposite challenge. Her public image has been carefully watched since she became connected to the royal family, and her position has become increasingly important as Prince William's future role has come into focus. Every interaction involving Catherine can carry symbolic weight. She is not simply another member of the family. She is expected to become queen consort one day, which means her behavior is constantly interpreted through the lens of the monarchy's future. This creates an unusual situation. Princess has already established her legacy. Catherine is still building hers and can rely on decades of public service. Catherine must constantly demonstrate that she is prepared for the enormous responsibility ahead. When these two generations appear together, people naturally look for signs of agreement or disagreement. But perhaps the more interesting question is what each woman can contribute to the other. Anne's experience provides a practical model of royal service. She has shown that longevity does not necessarily require constant media attention. Her work has often taken place away from the most glamorous royal events. She has spent years supporting charities, organizations, and public causes, building credibility through consistency rather than spectacle. Catherine's role requires a different kind of visibility. She must connect with a younger audience while preserving the dignity associated with the monarchy. She has become particularly associated with issues involving children, families, mental health, education, and early childhood development. Her public work, therefore, reflects an attempt to connect traditional royal patronage with modern social concerns. Neither approach is automatically better. They simply belong to different moments in the history of the institution. That is why claims of a generational clash can be tempting. They provide a simple explanation for something much more complicated. If one royal prefers tradition and another appears more modern, it is easy for commentators to construct a story about competition. But royal life is rarely that straightforward. The monarchy itself is constantly negotiating between tradition and adaptation. It must preserve centuries-old ceremonies while remaining relevant to people living in a digital age. It must maintain hierarchy while appearing accessible. It must protect privacy while operating under almost permanent public observation. And it must somehow convince younger generations that an institution rooted in history still has a meaningful role in their lives. Princess Anne and Catherine represent different answers to that challenge. Anne's answer has largely been service. Catherine's answer increasingly involves connection. One demonstrates that the monarchy can remain useful through discipline and duty. The other demonstrates that the institution must understand how people communicate and connect in the modern world. That does not make them rivals. In fact, it could make their relationship more important than the dramatic headlines suggest. There is another factor that cannot be ignored: the changing structure of the royal family itself. For much of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, the monarchy had a large number of working members. Over time, that number has decreased. Some members stepped away from royal duties, others retired, and some died. The result is that a smaller group of senior royals now carries a much larger share of public responsibilities. This makes people like Princess Anne extremely valuable. Her experience, reliability, and willingness to work mean that she can support the institution during periods of transition. At the same time, Catherine's growing importance means that she represents the continuity of the monarchy beyond the current generation. In other words, the future does not necessarily require the past to disappear. It may require the past and future to work together. That is why a supposed disagreement between Anne and Catherine can become symbolic even when the actual details are uncertain. People are not merely interested in two women. They are interested in what those two women represent. One represents experience. The other represents succession. One has spent decades protecting the institution through duty. The other is preparing to inherit an enormous public role. And when a story introduces Queen Camilla and her family into that equation, the situation becomes even more fascinating because Camilla herself sits between generations. Camilla became queen consort after decades of public scrutiny. Her relationship with King Charles III transformed her from one of the most controversial figures surrounding the monarchy into a central member of the institution. Her children, meanwhile, have remained largely outside the formal machinery of royal duty. That creates an unusual family structure. Camilla is at the heart of the monarchy. Her children are connected to it without being working royals. Anne is a senior working royal with decades of experience. Catherine belongs to the generation that will eventually lead the institution. There are naturally many different relationships and loyalties within such a family. But none of those relationships should automatically be interpreted as evidence of conflict. This is where responsible storytelling becomes important. A compelling royal story does not need to invent a confrontation. It can explore the questions raised by public events without presenting speculation as fact. It can ask why audiences believe certain narratives, why certain personalities attract particular interpretations, and how the monarchy's changing structure affects the people inside it. That approach can actually create a stronger story because it allows viewers to think instead of simply telling them what to believe. Consider Princess Anne's position again. She is one of the few senior members of the current monarchy who has lived through almost the entire transformation of the modern royal institution. She witnessed a monarchy under Queen Elizabeth II, experienced the enormous changes brought by modern media, and continued working through periods of intense public criticism. Her experience cannot simply be replaced. Catherine, however, has something Anne's generation never had to the same extent. Direct exposure to a global digital audience that can react instantly to every appearance. The pressure is enormous. A small mistake can become an international headline. A simple expression can become a meme. A private family moment can be transformed into thousands of social media posts. And this creates a completely different environment for Catherine than the one and experienced when she was younger. The two women therefore operate under different rules, even though they serve the same institution. Anne's generation learned to survive by saying less. Catherine's generation must survive in an environment where saying nothing can sometimes create even more speculation. That is one of the greatest changes in modern royal communication. Silence no longer necessarily means privacy. Sometimes silence creates a vacuum, and the internet immediately fills that vacuum with theories. This may help explain why stories about royal tension spread so quickly. If two royals do not publicly explain their relationship, people create their own explanations. If they appear distant, viewers speculate. If they appear close, viewers speculate. If one smiles and the other does not, speculation begins again. The monarchy cannot completely control this process. And perhaps that is one of the biggest challenges facing the institution today. The royal family depends on public trust, but cannot reveal everything about private life. It must maintain boundaries, yet those boundaries often encourage speculation. The result is an endless cycle in which the less information the public receives, the more people attempt to interpret what they can see. That is why images have become so powerful. A single photograph can become the foundation of an entire narrative, but a photograph captures only one moment. It does not show what happened 5 minutes earlier. It does not reveal what someone was thinking. It does not explain the conversation happening outside the frame, and it certainly cannot prove a private argument. This is especially relevant when discussing Princess Anne. Her natural seriousness can easily be mistaken for anger. Her direct manner can easily be transformed into a story about confrontation. Her reputation can become evidence for a claim that has not actually been demonstrated. That is not fair to her, and it is not fair to Catherine either. At the same time, the public's fascination should not be dismissed. Royal watchers are interested because the monarchy is entering a period of transition unlike anything seen for decades. King Charles III's reign represents one stage. Prince William's eventual reign will represent another. Catherine's role will therefore become increasingly significant. Princess Anne's role may remain important precisely because of the experience she brings from an earlier era. The question is how these different roles will coexist. Will the monarchy become more streamlined? Will senior royals increasingly divide responsibilities among themselves? Will traditional expectations continue to dominate? Or will younger members introduce new ways of connecting with the public? These questions matter far more than an unverified claim about one argument. They help explain why even a small interaction can become a major royal story. And perhaps this is where the supposed dispute involving Laura Lopez becomes especially revealing. Laura is not at the center of the constitutional succession. She is not competing with Catherine for a future royal position. She is not replacing Princess Anne. Her presence in the family is personal rather than institutional. That means any story portraying her as a major political rival within the monarchy should immediately invite skepticism. There is a huge difference between being part of a famous family and being a working member of the institution. The public often merges those two ideas because everyone connected to Windsors attracts attention, but the distinction is essential. A person can attend a royal event without having an official royal role. A person can be related to the monarch without influencing constitutional decisions. A person can have a private disagreement without that disagreement representing a royal power struggle. Understanding those differences makes the story much clearer, and it also makes the real question more compelling. How does a family remain a family when almost every interaction can be interpreted as politics? That may be one of the most difficult aspects of royal life. Imagine having a conversation with a relative knowing that cameras could capture your expression and millions of strangers could debate it later. Imagine attending a formal event knowing that one wrong movement could be interpreted as disrespect. Imagine trying to support a family member while also protecting your own public responsibilities. For ordinary people, family disagreements disappear into private life. For royals, privacy can be almost impossible. That does not mean disagreements never happen. It means the public rarely has enough information to know exactly what those disagreements mean. And that distinction should remain at the heart of this story. Princess Anne and Catherine may have different personalities. They may have different priorities. They may even disagree about certain matters. But none of that automatically equals a feud. The more realistic possibility is that they are navigating the same institution from very different positions and knows what the monarchy has been. Catherine is preparing for what it will become. That is a fascinating relationship, even without a dramatic confrontation. And perhaps the most important lesson from the entire controversy is this. The future of the British monarchy will not be decided by one headline, one photograph, or one viral clip. It will be shaped by years of service, public trust, family cooperation, institutional adaptation, and the ability of different generations to work together. Princess Anne's contribution to that future may be quieter than a viral confrontation, but it could prove far more significant. Catherine's contribution may become more visible as her responsibilities increase. And Queen Camilla's family will continue to occupy an unusual position, close enough to attract attention, but largely outside the formal structure of working royal duties. That mixture guarantees that speculation will continue. But viewers should always remember the difference between what is documented and what is merely suggested. The most responsible royal commentary does not remove the drama. It places the drama in context. And once the sensational claims are separated from the verifiable facts, a much more interesting picture emerges. A monarchy caught between generations, tradition, modernization, public expectations, and private family relationships. Perhaps there was never a dramatic explosion behind the scenes. Perhaps there was simply a moment that looked dramatic from the outside. Or perhaps, like every family, the royals occasionally experience genuine disagreements that the public will never fully see. Whatever the truth may be, one thing remains clear. The story surrounding Princess Anne, Catherine, Laura Lopez, and Queen Camilla is not simply about who said what. It reflects a much bigger fascination with how power, tradition, family, and succession interact inside one of the world's most famous institutions. And as the British monarchy moves toward its next chapter, those questions are only going to become more important. In the end, the biggest question is not whether Princess Anne truly confronted Catherine or whether Laura Lopez was involved in a dramatic royal dispute. Without reliable evidence, those claims should remain speculation. What the story does reveal, however, is how fascinated the world remains with the private relationships inside the British royal family. Princess Anne and Catherine represent two very different generations, and has spent decades proving her commitment through duty, discipline, and public service. Catherine represents the future of the monarchy and carries expectations that are completely different from those faced by and when she was younger. Their personalities may not always be identical, and they may occasionally see things differently, but that does not automatically mean there is a feud. The same caution applies to Laura Lopez. Being Queen Camilla's daughter places her close to the royal family, but it does not make her a working royal or political rival to Catherine. Online stories can easily turn an ordinary family interaction into something much bigger, especially when a photograph or a short video is taken out of context. And this is perhaps the most important lesson for royal watchers. A dramatic expression is not proof of anger, a serious conversation is not proof of an argument, and a viral headline is not proof of a secret confrontation. The British monarchy is entering a period of generational change. King Charles represents the present, while Prince William and Catherine increasingly represent the future. Princess remains an important link to the institution's past and demonstrates how years of consistent service can create lasting credibility. Perhaps the real story is therefore not about a royal feud at all. It is about how different generations can protect the same institution in completely different ways. And strength is experience. Catherine's strength is the ability to connect with a modern audience. Camilla's family adds another layer to the complicated personal relationships surrounding the crown. Behind the palace walls, they are still human beings with their own personalities, relationships, and private conversations. The public may never know every detail, and perhaps it should not. What we can observe is their public service, their official appearances, and the moments they choose to share. Everything beyond that deserves caution. So, was there really a shocking royal clash? The evidence does not establish one, but the discussion surrounding it tells us something important. People remain deeply invested in the future of the British monarchy, and every interaction between its most recognizable members can become a story of its own.